My name's Leslie Peterson, and I help bloggers turn their modest websites into thriving online enterprises with SEO, email marketing, and a little hard love encouragement to always move forward consistently and with a plan. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Blogging with Leslie Peterson. And today I am thrilled beyond measure to have my friend Gary Arndt here with us so I can ask him some questions and get some amazing insight from him. Gary, I think I first met you at a TBEX a while back, but I've known him for his blog, Everything Everywhere, which is one of the industry giants in the travel writing space. But Gary has since changed gears, and I learned that in my conversation with him at TBEX this year. And that is why I'm so thrilled to have him on the show to talk with us about that changing direction, which, spoiler alert, is about podcasting. So Gary, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
My first question, which I would love for you to share with us a little background, and I feel like from you've had a massive career change in that you used to be a travel blogger and now you're a podcaster. And I'm wondering if you can tell me if that's an accurate assumption. And then what led to this change in direction from you?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. I started back in 2006. I was going to travel around the world for a year. So I started a website because I had a background in going back to like the early 90s, very early in the internet. So it was a natural thing to do. And my blog was a blog. And I say this because most people, like your website, is not really a blog. It's a website. It's not a web log. But my site, when I launched it, was in fact a web blog. I was traveling on the world and I was just writing stuff. I would use clever puns or lyrics from songs for titles. There was no SEO. I don't even know when I first heard that term. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook when I started, or at least it was limited to like elite universities still. People came to the website and that was your social media. And they would maybe follow it on an RSS reader or something like that.
Oh, that's old school. Yeah.
And that was the metric was, you had a feed burner chicklet on your website. And I got mine to like 25,000 at one point, which was a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was blogging. And you had all these other things. You'd swap links with people and you'd have a list on the sidebar. Oh, you can visit these other blogs. And everyone just did this and it was all cool. And then slowly over time, all of that kind of went away. And the day I would say that real blogging died was the day that they killed Google Reader. And what happened is you then saw this transformation where Facebook was like, oh, you got to have a Facebook page. Oh, so invest in your Facebook page. And then you did that. And then all of a sudden organic traffic on Facebook disappeared. Oh, well, you gotta buy ads if you want to reach your audience on Facebook. And over time, like I was getting less than 10% of my traffic from Google back in 2010. And I remember just before the pandemic asking some bloggers, travel bloggers, how much of their traffic was coming from a combination of Google and Pinterest, which I also consider to be a search engine. And it was over 90% for pretty much everybody. Like it was almost universal. And I noticed this is, still before the pandemic, everyone started writing the same thing. It was 15 things to do in blank.
And 14 of them were all the same.
Right. And you've seen these content farms out there like the Crazy Tourist that gets millions of page views a month. And the front page is just a machine created list of like 15 things to do in Branson, Missouri, 15 things to do in this place, Missouri, 15 things to do in this place, Missouri. All of the images are taken from Shutterstock. There's nothing really original. There's no authors listed, and Google seems to love it. And that was not why I got into doing this. I like traveling. I like explaining to people the things that I discover along the way. That was kind of why I did it. And I was very down on the whole travel blogging thing. So by the time the pandemic hit, no, my website was not one of the big travel blogs anymore. This idea of traveling around the world and documenting your travels was kind of a thing when I started, but by the time the pandemic hit, that was pretty much dead. Having a generic travel site didn't really fly. You had to have something specific.
Super
And
niche. Yeah.
yeah, and what you saw during the pandemic is a lot of people who had sites like mine, you know, Traveling Mitch or Backpacking Judy or whatever it is, a lot of them shifted over to niche specific sites. Best example I can think of are Kaz and Craig Makepeace, who had their website was Why Travel Blog, which
And
was kind
now
of a
they're
generic.
doing, yeah, now they're doing Raleigh.
And now they've niched down on Raleigh Durham, and they're doing really well. They're on television talking about it. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff. And when the pandemic hit for me, so this is before the pandemic strikes, I'm not feeling good about where this whole thing is going. And when the pandemic hits, within a period of like 2 weeks, I got COVID right away, like the first week of March 2020.
Oh, you were in the first wind.
Yeah, I got home from a trip from Portugal. Within 2 weeks, the whole travel and tourism industry shuts down. 95% of my income disappears. I'm thinking, well, this is going to be over with in a few weeks. That April or May will be back to normal. And I started talking to some high-ranking people I knew in the tourism industry, and they're like, "No, this is going to be years in the making to get this through." And I'm like, what am I going to do? Because I never in my wildest dreams thought that the travel and tourism industry was going to disappear. And I needed to kind of diversify away from travel. And I'd been podcasting for a long time. I started a show in 2009. Way before that, I was like doing live streaming on Winamp back in 2000. I used to have a video game live stream show that we did back then. So This Week in Travel, we started in 2009, and I had an idea for a podcast back in 2018. I got the artwork done. I got the theme music. I bought the rights to it. I had everything set to go, and I began researching it. And the first episode is going to be like 2 to 3 hours long. And I just kind of did the math, and I realized this isn't going to work. But I went back to the idea, and a few years ago, I was at an event speaking, and I was in a speaker reception. I met Chris Gillibo. I don't know if you know who he is.
No, I don't know.
He's an author. He's coming out of the book tomorrow, Gonzo Capitalism, stuff like that. Had a very popular event, the World Domination Summit, which had like 1,000 people attend. He told me he was quitting the summit. And I said, why? I said, well, I started a daily podcast. And his thing is Side Hustle School. And he says, it's the best thing I've ever done. He was just doing really well. And so I thought about it as like, well, instead of doing this thing where I have a 2 to 3 hour episode that I did maybe once every 2 weeks, what if I did a show that was every day, that was like 10 minutes long? And I did the math on that. And I was like, this works out much better, like much better. I can see why he's doing this. And so I created a list of show ideas. I used the name of my website, Everything Everywhere, which is the most generic name possible for the podcast. And I started on July 1st, 2020, and launched the show and just kept doing it. And today, the show's doing really well. I get 1.1 million downloads a month.
And that's just going to grow exponentially. I mean, that's a number bigger than I can get my head around, but if you're doing daily, I mean, it can only grow exponentially.
I don't know if it'll be exponential, but it certainly has tons of room to grow. I think it absolutely could increase tenfold over the next 3 years. Because then the reaction I've gotten from people is unlike anything I've ever had blogging. Absolutely not even in the same ballpark.
Well,
the messages
let's
I get
talk
from
about
people,
that, because I think, so I'm a true blogger. I'm not an influencer. I do have an Instagram account, but to be really candid, I just can't stand Instagram or TikTok. But when we hear people in our space talk about blogging or social media, they always talk about it as these are ways of connecting with your audience. But in speaking with you, I would say you don't even know what connection really is, because I think that you found a different level of connection. Will you disagree or agree?
I get emails from people, just thinking of a few off the top of my head. One was from a woman who said, "You don't know this, but you are my son's favorite teacher. And every night before we go to bed, we listen to one of your podcast episodes, and he just loves it. And he'll wake up and he'll start researching things about whatever that was, all on his own, and he just loves it." I got one from the other day, a guy who's like, "I go fishing every day, and I take you with me, and you're my fishing companion." I had one from a man, and I for the life of me don't know why one of his children passed away. And he said, "This was a very hard time for me, and I got through it by just listening to your podcast." I've had truck drivers, food truck, people that own food trucks, people in universities, all walks of life who've reached out to tell me about how much they love the show. And this isn't one of these this is not a touchy-feely show. This is not Oprah. This is an educational show.
And
but,
about 10 minutes long.
Yeah. But I've touched a nerve with a certain segment of people that just like, and it's not they become obsessed with the show. And there's many, like hundreds of people that have listened to every episode. And I've done 1,100 episodes. And I have had some people tell me that they've listened to all of them twice, that they'll go back and listen to them again. So I never got these kind of emails blogging or posting pictures to Instagram. And one of the things I realized was, can you tell me the last 10 things you liked on social media?
No.
No, nobody can. It's ephemeral. You just do it. You scroll through, blah, 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 like, whatever. A lot of times, oh, they're a friend of mine. Sure, I'll like it just to be nice. But
Right.
it doesn't stick with you. Hearing someone's voice is completely different than reading something. I've been listening to this podcast that you've been doing every day. I'll like go to the store, something, it's short, so I can listen to a lot of it. I can tell by listening to your voice the enthusiasm and passion you have for what you're doing in a way that you could never convey in print because you just can't, right? The emojis and the emoticons and stuff just don't do it.
Right.
But you can tell, and people have very good BS filters that they can tell if somebody truly knows what they're talking about or if they're just kind of like, BSing their way through it. Right. And that is one of the beautiful things about a podcast. And of course, the other thing is where people consume it is very different. They're going to consume it in those places where they're driving, they're walking, they're doing chores, they're working.
And you're saying that's what makes it, there's an advantage to podcasting over YouTubing, for example.
Yes.
Because of that.
And we can talk about monetization, but spoiler, you can make a lot more money with a podcast.
That's and yes, probably because the advertisers are understanding that I'm not limited to where I consume the information. So I'm not limited to the amount of time in my day available to consume that information because I don't have to be sitting down looking at a screen necessarily.
Right. You can consume it anywhere. And, sometimes people may not listen to my show every day. Maybe they'll let a week's worth pile up and then they take a flight or they go on a trip or something. And then they just listen to all of them. So there's no one set way to consume the content. You can do it at your leisure whenever you want. And it's just a more intimate medium.
So talk to me when you first started, it's 2020. Everybody's also at this time trying new and different things, unless you're me. And I just went, oh my God, I'm just going to sit at the beach or find the mountains. But at what point did you recognize that podcasting was going to be a long-term play for you? Like, when did you know, was there signs for you that were like, this is right for me and who I am as a person and how I want to put myself out into the world. But number two, this is a viable business and not just a hobby.
I knew it was viable from day one because I had done the math on what a daily podcast could do in terms of revenue and how quickly it could get to that point. And I had seen other people do it. And I felt that I had a comparative advantage in podcasting opposed to everything else. Anybody could make a travel blog. And I'm sure you've met many anybodies who have travel blogs, right?
Right.
Right. And it's getting worse with AI.
Yes,
I don't think there are many people that could do my podcast,
I agree with that.
given the type of podcast and the breadth of it, and the people who could do it. The vast majority of them wouldn't want to do it because of my production schedule. So I've created a barrier to entry that doesn't really exist online. And podcasting in general has a higher barrier to entry. It's not hard. It really isn't. Um, I use GarageBand, which came for free on my Mac. This is a new microphone. It's a nice one, but before that,
It's better than mine with the duct tape on it. That's for sure.
I had a 10-year-old one that I used for the majority of the show, and that was it. There's no real expense that went into it. There are hundreds of millions of websites out there. You can have a robot make them, right? You can just automate the process. You can't do that with podcasting. Now, I know there are people who say, "Oh, there are AI voices and stuff like that." If you've ever listened to one, it is like
Right.
well,
I
eating
already can't stand
sawdust.
Siri, and Alexa. So
Yeah, and it's very boring. You can't put in puns and jokes, and you can't. It'll never compete with a human in that respect. Or if it can, it's going to require so much work that you might as well someone should just do it themselves.
Right.
So it's a very personal medium with a higher barrier to entry. There was a spike in new podcasts that occurred during the pandemic, and the number of podcasts has been decreasing like every week since. Like there are some metrics out there, and you can just see this downward slope of the number of podcasts that have released new episodes. But as the number of podcasts keeps getting smaller, the podcast audience keeps getting bigger. And this isn't like it's like, oh, one day TikTok is the new thing and Snapchat was the new thing. It becomes popular and then it kind of fades away. This has been 20 years of steady growth. Every year getting 1 or 2% bigger than the year before it. And it's to the point now where most Americans know what a podcast is. Most of them have listened to one, and a very large percentage of them are regular listeners. So just from the demographics of it, it is, I'm one of a few people doing something like this. The other people that do shows like mine tend to be big media companies, and a lot of them have like the History Channel just had a show that a podcast they did, and they just shut it down. And I'm like,
yes,
contact the History Channel, see if we can take over their feed. Because they have high expenses. I have nothing. I'm sitting in an office. That's it.
Well, I remember when we were talking about this initially, and you shared with me the value of it, and I'm thinking in my head, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. And not only I was thinking, I can, but like it's there. I have that little passion. There's a little passion inside that's like, yeah, I want to talk about this. I really want to talk about this. But you said to me, the real competitive edge is being consistent.
Yes, absolutely. If you ever had a newspaper growing up, like a physical paper, there was never a day where they said, sorry, we just didn't feel like we didn't do a good job today, so we're not going to put out a paper. That never happened.
Right.
There's never a nightly news where they just don't put it on because they just don't feel like it.
Right.
And so that is one of the tricks in podcasting. And there's most podcasts never get past episode 7.
Really?
People have
at least I've gotten that far so far.
Yeah. But most people, it's like, yeah, I want to start a podcast. And it's just a thing that they do. And it's not a high priority. And something will eventually come up. And so they put it on hold. And then they never go back to it. And then it dies. It's called pod fading. And that happens all the time. So a huge part of it is just showing up. And if you can usually stick through it for, say, about a year and a half, that's when, I don't know, a lot of people just start saying it's at that 18-month point is when things really start to take off. It's when it really started to take off for me. But you have to get to that point, and most people will give up by the time they get there.
My audience will know. I'm consistent or die. That's basically me. I'm going to do it or I'm going to die. So you're stuck with me, guys, for at least 18 more months. Here's my question. Well, I certainly don't want to ask. I'm not asking for any hard numbers. I do want to talk about the monetization side, because blogging right now is a scary place. I know I've only been doing it not as long as you, only 14 years, but I've never seen as much turbulence as I've seen the last, 6 or 8 months, especially with the advent of AI. And we were talking beforehand about how it's becoming increasingly more difficult to make a substantial living as a blogger. So I'm wondering if we as bloggers are paid through ad networks, affiliates, brand deals. Some people have products that bring in ancillary information. How does that line up with podcasting? Are those still the same avenues that you're using for as revenue channels, or is there a whole new layer that isn't obvious?
So the monetization is different, and it comes from the fact that there's nothing to click on.
Hmm.
So it's more akin to traditional radio or television advertising. I tried doing some affiliate ads when I first started the show, and they did not perform at all. That being said, there are people out there like John Lee Dumas and his podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire.
Mhm.
I met his wife at a show earlier this year. They've done very well with certain affiliates. So they'll bring on guests from that company. They'll talk about the product. They will then resell the product with a code or whatever. But they're dealing with a very niche audience, whereas I'm not. My audience is
The world.
all over the place.
Anybody
So
interested in learning something?
So it really depends on what your podcast is about. So for a broad-based podcast like mine, I'm basically just doing ads on a CPM basis. I have 2 ads per episode, and I did just this morning. I got my monthly notification from the bank that my wire had gone through, and it was the biggest amount that I've ever gotten, and it's in the multiple 5 figures a month at this point.
Wow.
And so far, really, that's it. It's just advertising. So there's a whole bunch of revenue opportunities I can tap into in the future. Right now, I'm a one-man show. I have no one helping me. I have no assistants. It's just me. And all my time is taken up having to produce tomorrow's show. So that's why I haven't really tapped into that. So I would love to get some people to help because there's a lot of things I would love to do. But as of right now, that's it. So, but like I said, that can, and to talk about the CPMs, a lot of people, if they want to do something like this, their first reaction is YouTube. Right. There are people out there who make a lot of money on YouTube. But to do that, you have to have a whole lot of views. The average CPM for something on YouTube, what a creator is going to get, is in the neighborhood of maybe $5, maybe less. I think what I've heard is that the top producing area in YouTube is finance, and they get about a $15 CPM.
Wow.
The average in podcasting, the average is $25. And I have seen CPM deals go up to $50, $60, $80.
Wow.
Depending on your niche and other things. So, the market has spoken as to what works better. YouTube, and the other thing with YouTube is it's like blogging. You have, in fact, the exact same company that you are reliant on. It is all dependent upon pleasing an algorithm. If the algorithm ever decides that you are no longer in favor with the algorithm, you're dead. Right. You lose everything. And it's happened about like once a month. There's always some YouTube creator that just has their site shut down. No explanation given, nothing else, and their entire livelihood is gone because they're entirely reliant on one company. That doesn't happen with podcasting. There's not one company that has the entire market. Apple and Spotify are the largest, but they don't host your podcast. You can get it on a website. You can get it on any player. There's tons of indie players out there. So you don't have that same problem. And by and large, most of your audience growth is not going to be coming from an algorithm. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but the search algorithms in podcasting are both not as important as for a web page. It's not like 90% of your traffic is coming from it. And they're also really dumb. Like,
Thank goodness. Like the early days of blogging.
yes. So in fact, I told you like your podcast was from blog to business. And literally Apple worries about like, what is the first word in your title?
Yes, which is why
So
just recently, I don't know if anybody even noticed, it's now blogging with Leslie Peterson.
yeah, so blogging is now the first word.
Right.
And uh, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into it. There are some sites that I know of, like in history, who I think have done well simply because of their name.
Mm.
Like if you're searching for the history of World War II, the History of World War II podcast is the one that's going to come
Probably
up
going to come up
first.
first.
And I've seen this happen a lot where it's like this show isn't necessarily that good, but it has the most obvious name, and that's why it kind of won. So that does happen, but yeah, there's also a lot of other stuff that goes on behind the scenes in terms of like what Apple is looking for. Basically, they reward successful shows. So the more downloads you get, the more downloads you get. So it's one of those things like how do you kind of get going, and they look at it over time and they look at your rankings, and so there's a lot that goes into it. But by and large, you don't even need any of that because if people just like your show, they'll tell other people about it.
Wow. Because they feel a true connection
Oh yeah.
instead of that superficial layer. Oh, I like that picture. I don't even know whose Instagram account that was, but I just hit the like button on that photo or that video with this stupid voiceover thing.
And the other thing is like stealing content. I mean, it's kind of a theoretical problem in podcasting, but not really. Whereas if you post a photo, somebody could just put it on their Instagram feed, or I mean,
Right.
you've seen scraper sites that just rip off articles and things like that. Not really a problem with podcasting.
And still the algorithm that we just talked about. There's Google's algorithm, there's YouTube's algorithm, and there's social media each have their own crazy algorithm too.
Yeah,
People have
you
to
just
remember.
need to make something that people like.
Which, to be really fair, is harder than what you're saying.
But
I
it's a
think,
different kind of hard, right?
mm,
It's like, oh, Google just implemented the whatever update, and now we got to all do this. And it's like, no,
right.
just you know, know what you're talking about. Be entertaining, and people will like you, and they'll like your show. That's it.
Yes, that's true. You don't have to go, oh, and then also I've got to make sure that there's that I say a word that starts with the M at the 5-second mark, which seems like the kind of silly nuances that you have to do with Google. Really silly stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Oh, there's things like on YouTube, I know, like a lot of creators, like you can't swear in the first 30 seconds of a video, but if you swear later in the video, it's okay. And
Yeah,
so
that doesn't make
I've
sense.
watched videos where it's like, okay, I can't say this now. I have to wait until this point in the video where I can utter these words. And again, they just make up these rules and they'll change the rules as whatever
And
becomes
then it gets in the
fashionable.
way of the relationship because if I need to say a swear word to you to get a point across because that's the passion that I'm driving at and it comes in the first 30 seconds, then in a podcast, then I can be myself and let the passion out without having to worry about again an algorithm.
Yeah, it's just, and the information by and large that Apple or Spotify have to go on is very little. There's the title of your show, there's the title of the episode, there's maybe some show notes, and that's it. The actual content of your show, there are some exceptions to that. People have found out that Apple is, in fact, for some of the more popular shows, they're actually doing a transcription of the entire show and looking for intent. I was one of the shows that they were doing it with, and I was actually rather surprised because they were finding meanings and references to things I never mentioned in the show, but
Oh
were related
wow.
to it. And it was actually kind of impressive. But
Well, so
yeah,
let's sorry, can we talk about the transcription side? So you haven't um just stopped utilizing your website. You're still bolstering the website and maybe I should say it the other way. You're bolstering your podcast by leveraging your website and
I
putting
have published
transcription.
more on my website since the podcast launched than I ever did before.
Can you
So
go over at a high level what your process is there?
so I write a approximately 2,000 word script every day
Mm.
about something. So today's that I literally published before we started this conversation is the history of tattoos. Tomorrow's
Ooh.
show is going to be about the element oxygen. Um,
Ooh.
Every episode is all over the place, but I published a 2,000 word script. And then when I publish the show, I cut and paste what I've written. I copy it into WordPress and I hit publish. And then I also, as soon as it's up on Apple Podcasts, I will cut and paste the code to embed a player, and I will put that on the page as well. And then I just move on to the next thing. So I'm not putting images in the article or anything like that. I'm not spending a lot of time on it. I'm just
No
taking the script.
SEO optimization.
None. Well, I will occasionally, like, I could put a kind of a clickbaity title that people will see in a podcast player to get them to listen, but maybe I'll change the title for the show page
Gotcha.
to something a bit more descriptive. But that's it. Beyond the title, there's nothing I do for SEO.
So you're kind of double dipping your funds then, because then you get ad revenue off the site and then ad revenue from the podcast,
But
which is nice.
the amount so I have Mediavine on the site.
Mm-hmm.
The amount I make off the podcast compared to Mediavine at this point, I probably am making, depending on the month, 25 to 30 times more from the podcast than I am on Mediavine.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I'm still making enough on Mediavine where it's between Mediavine and Patreon, it covers my rent.
So it's still worth keeping the ads on there. It's just that it's astronomically larger on the podcast.
Yeah. And I actually may cut back on the ads on Mediavine just to a point where it's like covering web hosting and ConvertKit and stuff like that. Just because it junks up so much of the page, I'll take off some of the video stuff that's there because I may want to put my own stuff there,
right?
Rather than promote someone else's thing. But yeah, I could even see a point in the future where I just get rid of the ads on my website entirely.
That's my goal. I would like to be in a place like that. So before we got on, and we talked a little bit about this in TBEX, but then specifically before we got on, you talked about kind of the trifecta. That's not the word you used. The legs of building a business like ours. One of them was podcasting. One of them was email marketing. What was the third one? Do you remember? Was
having a website, an email newsletter, and podcasting. Each of those do different things. But what all three of them have in common is that you own them. So the three legs are not have a Facebook group, have an Instagram presence, be on Threads,
right?
All of which I don't even know if you saw it. Like yesterday, Elon Musk says that they're gonna stop referring people if you post a link to an article. That they want you to post the whole article on Twitter.
Oh wow! So I didn't even know that it was opened up to that many characters.
Oh yeah, you can if you buy their verified checkmark thing now. Gotcha. Post longer stuff, and so
but then now that's great. That's like another medium then.
Yeah, basically, but with a lot more users. But this notion of companies like Twitter or Facebook or Google, for that matter, providing traffic, I think is eventually going to go away.
Oh, absolutely.
There will still be, you still, my website is still sort of the base of operations I have. I can refer people to the website. An email newsletter is a way you can reach out to people, which is important as opposed to them coming to you.
Right.
And a podcast, I believe, is really a more intimate way. It's a qualitative thing. Emails can get stuck in spam filters and maybe they don't read it or something. You can reach people in a way that you just can't with a podcast that you can't on a website or an email. So I think those three things, all three of which are things that you can own and control, that nobody can shut down, are really vital. And I know a lot of people that are like, well, I don't like the sound of my voice and I don't like, talking and stuff. And you'll get over that within a week.
For sure.
Even when I started the show, it was awkward because I had been podcasting since 2009, but it was me and two co-hosts and we would have a discussion. And now I found myself, I had to do this podcast and I had to talk to my computer screen and there's no one in a room. And that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yes,
And I
that's
was
what I do. And I'm waving my arms around,
like,
but and no one can see me.
no, and I do the same thing. I found that if I use hand gestures and whatnot, it helps me read it as
Hmm.
opposed to just sitting there, you read it as if you did have an audience, which you do, that's just delayed. Um, but I got over that real quick. And now it's just second nature. I can do it no problem. Um, but yeah, I think it's so important. And podcast, this is, the best time to start a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is today.
Right.
And it really, all the numbers are working in your favor. Advertising is going up. More people are finding it. The number of podcasts, so your competition is decreasing. The number of listeners is going up,
So
and
demand's increasing.
it's qualitatively different.
The other thing, as I talk to people about in the blogging, the thing that prevents people from moving into a new, topical area in blogging or starting an email list or getting their newsletter out there, and I imagine it has to be the same for podcasting, is the fear of starting something new. And I remember the first newsletter I sent out, which was like to 5 people, and you still have to talk as if it's 50,000 people. And so I imagine that stops a lot of people when it comes to podcasting. But what I found, so I just hit 1,300 downloads in a month. I mean, there's no way I'm going to grow an email list that quickly. So I think what I would share, and I wondered what your thoughts were on this, is that the fear of starting something new, the fear of talking to nobody, those first couple episodes, is something that you don't have to deal with for as long a period of time as other ways of talking to people.
Well, and part of that also has to do with having a daily show. You get in more reps. If there's like an equation that determines success of a podcast, one of it is longevity. How long have you been around? There are other things that go into it. And one of the things is the number of episodes you've produced. So the easiest way to get out more episodes is to just do it every day. And, I figured it out when I hit the 3-year mark of my show. I was around a little under 1,100 shows. But if I had a weekly show, I would have been at episode number 150.
Mm.
So, well, 1/7 of what I had. So,
Right.
yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Well, and I think the other thing about doing it every day, and I only do it 5 days a week, but there's that, Malcolm Gladwell, is that his name, has come back and said he's not 100% behind this anymore, but the whole 10,000 hours to mastery, you begin to get better faster when you're doing it more frequently.
Yes. And the thing is, no matter what you want to do, the first time you do it, you're going to suck.
Yes.
Like if it's not the worst, the first time you do it is always going to be the worst time you do it. And it had better be the worst, because if it's not, that means you're getting worse, not better.
Worse.
Right?
So true. It's so true.
So the best thing, people's like, oh, well, I'm waiting to put my podcast out. It's just not right. I'm like, just do it. I don't know if you know who Mr. Beast is, right?
Yes. Yes. And yes, we have the chocolate in our house right now.
And he is a massive following.
Yes.
Did you ever see his first videos?
No, were they bad?
Awful. It's just him sitting at a desk talking. It's nothing like what it is. It's just bad. But he kept doing it and he got better and better. And that's how it works. And so, yeah, you just have to start doing it. And then, then you gain an audience and you start getting on more people's radar. One of the things that I would do if I were you is to go to some of these other podcasts that are in the similar niche and be a guest on their show and have those people as a guest on your show.
Well, I just wonder, like, do people, I feel like you're a guest on my show because you're my friend, but I feel weird asking people to be a guest on a show when my podcast is so small and so new.
There are some people out there that will say no for that reason. But then there are some people out there that will go, yeah, sure, when? My policy is I say yes to every interview request.
Wow.
Everyone. I never say no, because I don't know how big their show is going to become. I don't know who's going to be listening. And I've done very small podcasts where I've been a guest and I've, gotten followers from that. So you just never know. And you have a lot going on other than your podcast, right?
Right,
Your
right.
your email newsletter and all the other stuff you do. So that has a lot to do with it as well. But you start appearing as a guest on those shows, they start appearing on a guest on your shows. Next thing you know, you're kind of in that mix together because when Google or Apple are doing these associations with like, okay, what is in this universe? Now you become a part of it. And one of the things I know we talked about at TBEX is the fact that blogging has become very cutthroat.
Yes.
Google's like, oh, don't, you can't have paid links. You can't be linking these link schemes. You don't do that. And in the old days of blogging, you'd link to your friends and other blogs that were similar all the time.
Right.
Well, and now everyone's afraid to do that because they'll get a Google penalty. Well, in podcasting, nobody cares. You can have your friends and talk to them or other people you respect and have a conversation about something, and you can be on their show and you can do all the cross pollination you want. And not only does no one care, it's kind of expected.
So interesting. I love this. I love this. Okay, I have another question for you. So I'm sure, hopefully, we've inspired some people to think about it again, to think about what kind of podcast they want to put together. And what I think is beautiful about what you did is that, first of all, you were lucky that you had a very generic name and not a name like 365 Atlanta Traveler as your blog name. But what do you think about like how much, I'm trying to form this question correctly, how related does the blog and the podcast have to be in order to make them marry together? Would you tell somebody who had a 365 Atlanta Traveler podcast, if that's what's holding you back, start something else because there's that much potential. Don't let your blog hold you back. Would you try to find a place of balance? Are you following my question?
I know you don't live in Atlanta anymore, but for the
Correct.
sake of this, assume you did.
Okay.
I think if you did the 365 Atlanta podcast, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same like a duplicate of the blog.
Right. It
But
wouldn't
that's a
be things
great,
to
but
do in this city and things to do in that city and eat at this restaurant.
no, but it's more like what's going on this weekend.
Right.
Oh, here's this concert. Such and such is going to be playing. This new restaurant's opening up. Here are things that are happening in that area. That's something that people in Atlanta may actually want to pay attention to, right? And that's in the ballpark of what you're doing, but it's not the same necessarily as
Right.
the website. You're providing a service and providing interesting information that's maybe not SEO optimized, but who cares? And it may be more time specific, but that's fine. Um, there was some guy that had a text based service that he was running out of New York, and people subscribed to it for like $8 a month, and they would get text messages for like what was happening at nightclubs and things that would be happening like in real time. It's like,
Oh,
oh, such and such is at this club
this
now,
comedian just showed up at this
right?
place. Oh, yeah.
So there's lots of things I think you can do. Um, how you do it is my show is not a travel show,
Right.
not
Which I
not as people consider it.
Well, I was going to say, while it I would not consider it a travel show at all, it marries beautifully to the blog that you had, though.
Yeah. So in my mind, travel was never about, I didn't get into this to do like, oh, things to do in this place and here are top hotels. I don't care about any of that. Never have, not of interest.
Mm.
I've always gone to national parks and World Heritage sites and gone to historic places and wanted to learn about, the history of things. So this podcast is a natural extension of how I traveled and the things I like to write about traveling. I don't call it a travel show uh, explicitly because one of the things I realize is that most people only care about travel when they're about to go on a trip. Travel is not something that you follow like sports or politics or technology or fashion, where there's things going on all the time. There's new things happening. So it's like, oh, well, we're going to San Diego for business. Let me find some things to do in San Diego. And then It's not something you're going to care about after that. You just
Right.
have this one thing. So I wanted to create something that people would have a constant interest in. And if along the way I can tell them about different countries and different places and different cities, great. And so what I found myself in is if you think of a marketing funnel, here's a good example. So your Atlanta website is kind of at the bottom of the funnel. You
Mm-hmm.
want to get people that are about to purchase something and click on something, right? They're in
Right.
the searching phase of it, right?
Right.
My podcast is like at the top of the funnel. I may do an episode on the history of Atlanta. Here's,
Gotcha.
do you know why Atlanta exists where it does?
The
It was
train.
railroad tracks. Yeah. It was one of the first cities in the world that sprang up because of an intersection of railroad networks. So
You
that's the
can
kind of
visit
thing
the terminus. You can go there.
but that's the kind of thing I would talk about on my show, like a big picture thing.
Right.
Like people didn't know this. Like, I didn't know that. Oh,
Mm.
that's interesting. Oh, there's this place in Atlanta that you can go to. You can see. I didn't know that. And then that would pique their interest, and then they would, maybe search on something.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of so to the extent that my show is I call it travel adjacent.
Mm.
Um, I'm putting myself higher up in the funnel. Now, you would think that being higher up in the funnel and piquing people's interest who may not already be searching on it would be the thing that travel brands would be interested in, right?
Well, I don't know
Because
that they're sophisticated enough to understand the power of that.
yeah, spoiler, they're not, because they're still interested in like, oh, come to our place and write an article. I'm
Right.
like, you do
Or
know
how
that
many
there are
TikTok
already,
followers do you have?
it's like you do know there are already 10 things on Google for whatever this keyword, this article, these people are going to write. You can just write the damn thing yourself
Right.
and put it on your own, website.
Right.
But yeah, that's been one struggle I've had, is that they just don't get podcasting at all.
But if you
Um,
know that, like if you can go into it as a travel writer, for example, if you can go into it understanding, okay, they don't get it. I mean, to be really honest, they don't get SEO either. I mean, it's all about social media. How many clicks, how many impressions can you give me in 2 weeks because I'm the PR firm and I only have 2 weeks to turn in the report. But if you can get beyond that and just go, okay, I refuse to be dependent on that anymore. I'm seeking another form of revenue with what I'm doing, then I think you're fine. But you just have to be aware that you need to be thinking differently.
oh, the great thing is I don't need the travel brands. I would like to work with them, but I don't need them,
Right.
because there are plenty of companies out there that are willing to spend large amounts of money on podcasting because it works so well.
Right.
And
But I think if
I
you're
should,
getting started though, you need to understand that it's a different model. It's a different, it may be a similar model, but it's a different group of people who are going to pay you.
I should say, with one exception, the tourist office of Spain has been great. They they started listening to my show from almost day one. They loved what I was doing. And they said, well, how can we work with you? How can we help you? I'm like, well, how about I just do episodes about Spain? And they're like, cool. And they never told me what to do an episode on. They're just do something about Spain. And they sponsored full episodes. And so I've done over, man, I've probably done close to 30 episodes about various things about Spain. So I've done stuff on like the history of the Canary Islands. I've done stuff about like the Salvador Dali. I've done about Queen Isabella, just different things. Like they have these crazy traditions all over Spain where like running of the bulls is one, and jumping over babies and jumping over fire.
Over
And
babies. I haven't listened to that episode.
yeah. And they were pleased as punch because it was something that it was a type of marketing they had never done before and nobody else was doing. But I've never found anybody who's really been interested beyond them.
Wow.
So
They're just, it's a huge hole for people, for advertisers.
yeah,
A
but I
huge,
mean, I'm patient. I'm going to keep working on it. I think it's a nut that can be cracked, and I maybe just need to talk to the right people.
Mm.
A lot of the people you meet with in like the blogging world are PR people, and I
right.
probably need to meet with the advertising people.
Advertising people. But I guess, so with that in mind, though, the advice you might give to somebody who's trying to figure out how to make what they blog about into a podcast is to think higher in the funnel.
That's one possible way to do it. I mean, you're simply because it's so hard to get attribution for like affiliate sales.
Mm,
Um, it's harder to be lower down in the funnel, right?
mm,
Because there's nothing to click on and you can't get attribution.
mm.
But what you do get in a podcast is plenty of presence of mind, right? Because people are listening to you and they're paying attention. And a mistake a lot of marketers made early on in the internet was they thought it was about eyeballs. It's not about eyeballs. The fundamental currency of
Attention.
the internet is attention and time. We all have a finite amount of time and attention that we can give things. And it's just not having someone seeing something and having a meaningless counter tick. It's actually paying attention. And podcasting is the best medium, I think, for getting people's attention.
I love that. Yeah, I'm thinking about like the marketing business podcasts that I consume. I consume it with a notebook. I'm taking notes, and that there's not a better indication of attention than something like that. So I love
Yeah.
that. Okay, I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, so I want to try to wrap it up. Is there a question I'm not asking you? Am I missing something? Is there a tip that you think, gosh, I wish people need to know this, but Leslie didn't ask me? Anything I'm missing?
There is no secret. You know, you've seen this in blogging. People think it's like there's, oh, just tell me the one thing, and then I will say these incantations, and then, Patronus blogus, and then you have a successful blog. That's not how it works. Um, it's something you got to do. I'm a big fan of daily shows, but obviously not everyone's going to do that. I get it. But being consistent and working on putting on something great and basically create the show that you want to listen to. That's really what I did with my show because I know
Mm.
nobody was making this. And I just love, I'm the guy, as a kid, I would read the encyclopedia. And today I can get lost in Wikipedia. You read one article and you click on it. Next thing you know, you're in a different one. And then here's a fun fact. 98% of the articles on Wikipedia, if you click on the first link,
Yeah.
whatever is the first link in the article is, as long as it's not a pronunciation, the first link, and just keep clicking the first link, the first link, the first link, you will eventually wind up on the page for philosophy.
Well, that's a story about life.
Try it.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't matter the topic. It could be OJ Simpson. It could be
That's
Jesus. It could
crazy.
be, yeah, paper.
Trigonometry.
Oh, that'll probably get you there quickly. But
Jeez. That's crazy.
yeah, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. People research before you launch a show, research the name. There's a lot of generic names out there, like
Like blogging with
no,
Leslie.
like Real Talk. I
Oh,
think there's
okay.
like several thousand shows that are all called Real Talk. So having some sort of identifiable name is going to be real helpful because if people search for
Fake
your
talk.
show, but I get people all the time. I'll be at a bar or something. It's like, what do you do? I'm a podcaster. And like, oh, they'll pull up their phone. What's the name of your podcast? And I go, everything everywhere. And then they can find it immediately. So that's very helpful. And just develop a format for the show. And there's no one way to do it. I have a 30-second cold open. So the first thing you always hear is my voice, not an ad
Mm.
or nothing else. I'm a big believer in that. Then you hear the ad and then the rest of the show. You can get some theme music super cheap. I use stockmusic.net. Got that for the theme for my show. It's like a 3-minute recording. I took it down to 9 seconds and it cost me $40. Have good show artwork. That's really important because that's the first thing people will see. I spent $500 on a graphic designer to make mine, and it was well worth the investment. And I've gone back to her since to do different dimensions so I can put it in different places to get it promoted on Apple and other platforms.
Right.
And yeah, be consistent. You don't need to spend more than $100 on a microphone, really.
Right.
The software to record it, that can be had for free. There's many platforms, and you can get a hosting account for a podcast for like $5 a month, much cheaper than blog hosting.
Right. Yeah. Okay. almost $4,400 a year for my blog host, and then I don't know, $20 a month for this.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to cost very much. And your show, a lot of people assume when they launch a podcast, it has to be an interview show. And I think there's nothing wrong with interviews. We're doing one right now. But I think having solo shows and then interspersing interviews does a better job of establishing the authority and expertise of the host
That's
than
interesting.
if you're just trying to be a talk show host, where you don't necessarily have to have, that's a skill in and of itself. There are people that are very good talk show hosts and not good talk show hosts, to have an interesting conversation. And I also think that if you're really going to do a good job interviewing, you have to put in the work to know who you're talking to. So like one of the most popular interview shows is Jordan Harbinger, who interviews a lot of people, and he'll he gets like every week someone who wrote a book, and he'll always read the entire book before they have that person on the show. And
Which you can't do if you're doing interviews every day.
correct. So he does 3 episodes a week, 2 of which are interviews, and I think he's now moving to 1 interview a week, and the other is just going to be himself. But there's, I'm trying to think of a lot of the more successful shows, and it's not universal because there's like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss that do interview shows, but
Right.
there are a lot of successful ones out there where it's either a single host or a host and a co-host. They're talking to each other about whatever the topic is. And so there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. Some shows are scripted, some are not scripted. Your show is not scripted. I found that because of my show, because I'm not really talking about one topic, it was just a lot easier to write the script out than to try to do it extemporaneously. And
I
there's
think
no
people would
one
be
right or wrong way.
surprised to learn that your show's scripted though, because you're animated. Like you could tell it's your script. You own, it's
Right.
your words, it's your personality.
I'm writing for the ear, not the eye.
Mm.
And that's a huge difference. Being a script writer is very different than, say, writing an article for a website.
Right. Well, Gary, thank you so much. I really thank you for being here. Thank you for turning me on to this. Podcasting has become a joy, and I owe all of that to you. 100%. I'm not even holding back a dime. That's 100% you. I appreciate that.
And you're just getting started.
I am.
And that's the thing to always realize.
It feels slow. I am celebrating all the small wins, and there's a lot to celebrate. It does feel small, but I have a lot of hope about the future. So,
well, I just, for the heck of it, I went and looked on Apple Podcasts for the term blog and blogging. And one of the things I noticed that a lot of the podcasts that show up high in the rankings aren't even active anymore. They've been abandoned in some cases for years.
Oh, well, if anybody's trying to get SEO advice from them, that would be a bad idea.
Right. But it gives you some insight as to how Apple does things. But I also think it should give you an insight as to the competitive landscape and how, there was one podcast that you mentioned, I think the Blogging Millionaire, and I actually listened to that for a while too, but I think he just stopped doing it.
Yeah.
And
he switched gears, right? Because he put an app together and now he's selling the app. But yeah, it just stopped.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gary. I really, really appreciate your time for joining us here today. And
my pleasure.
Everything Everywhere podcast. Did I get that right?
Everything Everywhere Daily.
Oh, daily. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Everything Everywhere Daily. I'll put the link in the show notes. Absolutely. Please listen. Feel free to listen with your kids too, like I do, because it's good, clean education. And
I have tons of people that listen with their kids. The show is not for kids.
Right. Absolutely. But
it's not written like, hey, kids, today we're going to learn about this. It's not pandering down. It's written for adults, but kids love it, I think, for that reason. All the time, it's like, yeah, my 8-year-old daughter loves your show. And, I'm talking about military tactics in the Roman Empire or something like that. And they like it. So, but I know there's no foul language. And I say it's as clean as history will allow.
I love it. Thank you, Gary.